topic, I have to say, is probably one of my favorites ever. My team knows there's no such thing as asking me a quick question about influencers, because it is one of the things that I can go on and on and on about for hours and hours. So we'll try and keep it to 45 minutes as per the plan. So I'm really excited to be able to moderate this panel. With me to dive into this topic, I have Pierre Loic, CEO of Traackr, and Martin Waxman, who is from Martin Waxman Communications. Gentlemen, welcome. To kick off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves, your roles, your company, what you do, and how you connect with influencer marketing?
Okay. Oh, I don't think, am I mic'd? Can you
now
hear me?
You are.
Yes, okay, great. So I really started in influencer marketing probably in the early 2000s, but we didn't really call it influencer marketing then. It was identifying chat leaders. And it was, the early days of digital media and chat rooms, and how could you get a brand to participate in a conversation, hopefully authentically. And since then, in my agency, Procter & Gamble Canada was a client, and we convinced them to hold their first ever event with bloggers. I mean, and that was a tough sell to them in 2007, because we felt it was really important. And so I worked with influencers mostly on the earned side, although a little bit on the paid side too. And I think now it's really shifting more to a paid relationship, but authenticity is still really important, and so is disclosure.
Cool. So how did you get connected to this? I started this company called Traackr. It's a technology platform that helps brands manage influencers, their relationships with influencers. Started this company back in 2010, I think around the time that we met, for that matter.
Yeah.
And we've followed since the evolution of the market. At the time, the terminology influencer marketing was barely coined. Mm-hmm. And people did not quite know what they were doing, neither did we. And we sort of followed suit and started documenting into technology the new workflows and processes as they were coming to life. And to Martin's point, just like everything that happens in marketing in general, and marketing and tech, things tend to start through the agencies. And I remember from my marketing days, I'm a recovering marketer. I actually used to be to build attribution models back at P&G back in the days, at the time when we didn't have enough data. Today we have too much data. And so I remember from these days that when we hear a compelling pitch from a vendor, we say, sounds great, just go talk to my agency. And that's how everything starts in marketing. We don't want to invest human resources first. You invest a little bit of budget to get visibility. That's how influencer marketing started. And so our business at first, was, as a technology platform, was to work with agencies for the most part. And over the years, what we saw was a lot of these programs were brought back in-house by the brands. And I'm sure we'll discuss why today. And so today we work with maybe 150 to 200 brands, mostly large companies, about 150 to 200 agencies as well. And we really sort of the technology backbone to the programs.
Incredible. That's amazing. So this is a super hot topic, still a ton of buzz around influencer marketing. Why should companies be thinking about this? If they're not already doing this, what can it do for their communications programs?
Yeah, so I'd start by saying that just like Molière said of Monsieur Jourdain, you're speaking poetry without knowing it. Every company, every one of you in the room is doing some level of influencer marketing, whether you call it that, whether you acknowledge it. The question is, at what point do you want to formalize this? But the notion that you're focusing on a specific set of people that have a disproportionate impact on your business, and you treat them different. You might call them your VIP customers, or your bloggers, or Instagrammers, or depending on the business you're in, but your investors as well, and your analysts, and your PR professionals and journalists, and your internal experts and evangelists you have in your company. All of these are forms of influencer marketing. What's happened over the years is not that these practices are new, but rather that they've scaled in size, and the lines have become very blurry. when you talk to a journalist, you know they're journalists, you know that there are rules of engagement with journalists and how you handle them. With John Doe out of Kansas City who blogs from his basement, the rules aren't the same. And so you have to define them so that it's just a little more murky. So the question for companies is more, at what point do you feel the need to formalize this program? And the answer typically is, once you start seeing a groundswell of activity from different places in your organization that make you see, give the image to the outside that you're a little disorganized, because many people are inviting the same person to the conference from different parts of your organization, or you're telling different stories, or things that we've all experienced. So yesterday I was in San Francisco talking to one of our customers at Oracle, and we're reminding ourselves how they got started working with us. And the story was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ray Wang from Constellation Research that has built his own analyst brand over the years, but he used to be a blogger before. And there was this one open world, the Oracle conference, where nobody invited him because everybody else thought they got him. And he sort of fell through the cracks, and he was one of the most important people. So when you start noticing things like this and the need for governance and consistency is the minute that you want to start saying, well, we're investing too much money to not be thoughtful about this, so let's just get organized.
Right.
Yeah, and one thing Pierre said, and I thought this is interesting, that influencer marketing has been around for a long time. And in fact, I think you could say that for communications, for public relations, it's part of our DNA. How many of you have read Edward Bernays' Crystallizing Public Opinion? I know that book has gotten some criticism, but it's one of the foremost books on public relations, written in 1923 by Edward Bernays, father of the profession. He talks about how communications people, or as he called them, public relations counsel, needed to go out, and it wasn't just getting a story in the media, it was finding out who was important and how do you place the story in front of them. So read that book. You'll get a great history of influencer relations. Anybody here have bacon and eggs for breakfast?
No, I wish.
Wow, you're a healthy group. I guess because we didn't have it here. Okay. But if you did, Bacon and Eggs are an influencer program from Edward Bernays, where he contacted a doctor, got him to define what a healthy breakfast was. They sent letters out to all these other doctors. Do they agree? Would they support it? Because Edward Bernays was working for the pork board, and they needed to sell more ham because they weren't selling it in the morning. And so that's a really good example of how influencer relations was always around. And it's just, it's much more, the amplification is much quicker these days. And that's why you need a platform like Traackr that can find and credential influencers that have context. Because the worst thing is, when Pierre started, there was another organization called Clout, which has since gone under because of all sorts of reasons.
Because of us.
Yeah, because of you.
Question, do you guys remember your clout scores?
Oh, I was 98. Not. It was ridiculous because it gave people a score from 1 to 100, and so influencers were ranked on this score but not out of context. So for some reason, because I was active in social media, I was getting promotions, and I was given the chance to drive a Buick, big deal, for a weekend, but I'm no car influencer, you know, and so what did that get them? So context is important.
So it sounds like a lot of companies have the makings of this already. So if they're looking to kind of expand those dribs and drabs and bring it into a program, where do they start? Obviously, there's a platform component, but is there organizational things? Is there things they need to do internally to really formalize that program and make it into influencers?
Research. I think you need to start with research, and Pierre was saying this too. You have to understand who is your audience, who are your stakeholders, who are you trying to reach, and who has some kind of influence over other people. And it can go with your employees, you know, because some of your employees can be brand ambassadors. You could look externally. And again, if you find a platform, you can do this on Google, of course, right? It takes a lot of time. But when you work with the right kind of platform, then you're able to find the kinds of influencers, and you don't need the ones who have 50 or 100,000 followers. You want people who are relevant to you and whose audiences are engaged with them. You know, don't be fooled by those big numbers.
Right.
So at the risk of really sort of damaging my business prospects, I'd say don't start with technology.
Okay.
This is just not, like, there's no easy button to influencer marketing. There's no solution, technology solution out there that's going to do the work for you. You can see any piece of technology that pertains to influencer marketing as the equivalent of Salesforce for salespeople. It will help. It help you get organized. It will help you scale, but it doesn't do the selling. So you still need to acquire that skill and have a strategy behind it in order to be successful, and Salesforce won't help you. Neither will Traackr, right? So I think this is one really important point, is to figure things out for your organization, and what it looks like is the most important thing. We work with a slew of organizations that have sort of crossed the chasm of getting to a place where they feel grounded in their influencer programs, but this was by no means a linear process for them. It was a very painful one. And I'd say the two things that I would call out that are extremely important to the ones that have managed through. The first one is to not try to change people's behavior at first, especially if you work in a large organization. If you start this from a change management program, then we'll talk again in 10 years and you'll still be there, right? And it's true for influencer marketing or anything else for that matter, right? What you start with is to use the tools around you, technology or else, to help people do their job better, right? So focus on the right use cases, focus on the right business case, and help them do it better so that you can build proof points that you can scale from. So the first one is this. And the way you go about this is, like I said, every organization is doing influencer marketing. So the first thing you do is get transparency, get everyone to volunteer their information. Again, if I use the Salesforce metaphor, put everything in Salesforce. We're not telling you to do anything different. Just put it in one system or in one place. And some people or some organization at smaller scale will do it in Excel spreadsheet, which is fine to a certain degree. But like you just need to share that information first and foremost. And just creating that visibility will help guide you to figure out where to put your focus and investment. And the second one is, if you want anything to make it in mainstream in your marketing stack, or rather your marketing processes, it has to be driven by data. So if you don't have data to show that what you're doing has an impact, it's never going to fly. It's always going to live on the fringe. It's always going to be experimental. It's always going to get cut the minute you have a bad quarter. And so for things to make it to mainstream, it has to start with data. I met a couple of months ago the CMO at Symantec, who came from Norton, like his name, I think he's Resha or something like this. And he was telling me that his first year, when he first joined through an acquisition, he had 130 agencies that worldwide Symantec was working with, that he was taking over, and a team of about 20 to 30 people. And it was completely unmanageable. So his first year, he actually hired 2 people to just do the analytics. And they changed nothing else, but just gathered all the analytics, all the data. At the end of year 1, he cut 90% of the agencies based on absence of results that were proven at that point. Invested a lot of that money into the ones that were actually working, hired a whole bunch of people internally to gather all the processes internally, because now he knew that this was meaningful to his organization. And I think now he has a team of about 150 and works with about 10 to 20 agencies.
Wow, what a transformation.
So, and that happened because he invested in data first and was able to go and justify to his board and to everybody else why that strategy was not working and why they needed to do different. But without that tool in his hand, he would not have been successful.
Right. It's an interesting example because Symantec has a bit of a mix, right? They certainly sell to consumers and sell to businesses as well. And I often meet with some skepticism from my clients who are in sort of the B2B space. They think, well, this is just a B2C thing, right? Unless you're PepsiCo, you don't need to use influencer marketing. How do you guys approach that question?
Well, I mean, if you think of influencer marketing as the 16-year-old girl that puts on lipstick on YouTube, you're probably right. Now, I would argue that in many cases, B2B businesses are better equipped than B2C businesses to do influencer marketing because that's all they got. There's really nothing else. And again, if you look at thought leadership, evangelist programs that a lot of the B2B companies will have, AR, PR, these are all versions of influencer marketing.
Yeah.
So you may put different labels on it, but the notion that this does not work for you is kind of ludicrous because you're doing it.
Yeah.
So it depends on labels that you put on these things.
Yeah, it's just in some ways on a smaller scale.
Right.
Similar to the difference between consumer PR and trade PR. You know, you're really focusing it. But if you can bring those influencers in, if you're at a big trade show, bring them in, invite them, celebrate them, get their ideas, show them that you're listening to them, they really can help spread the word.
And what about the agency play? How does an agency feed in to this? Because you talked a little bit about the agency challenge. I mean, obviously they have a role to play, but do you have to do this with your agency, or is this a way to maybe lessen your agency spend?
So interestingly, we're going to release next week a report that we put together with the folks at Altimeter, the research company, on the future of influencer marketing, and we interviewed, I think, about 120 marketing leaders to tell us about their program. It's the second year we're doing this. We did this last year, and so we have like interesting comparative data. So I have it fresh in mind because I just read the proof of this. Interestingly, when you look at companies that bring the programs in-house, they spend more money altogether on their influencer program, twice as much as the ones who don't.
Really?
Which is not very surprising because it's also a matter of maturity. And so if you've shown the ability to bring something in-house, it means that you have more proof points, you're going to invest more. So I would not read too much into this. But the thing that really surprised me is that the investment in agencies grows proportionally.
Okay.
So it doesn't go down.
Right.
It increases proportionally. So they spend twice as much on agencies. When you go into more details, they use them in a very different way. There's no outsourcing of strategy anymore. So they figure out the strategy. Very often, the engagement with influencers is also taking place internally with these companies. But they need the companies more for two things. One is campaign fulfillment. And that includes not just the contracting with influencers. In some cases, there's a very strong creative streak to this that most businesses don't have. And the second one is also the approach that businesses have with influencers when they handle the metrics and the aftermath of the campaigns to gather all the content back, etc. So the use for agencies doesn't go away. It just changes in nature.
Right. I do love the idea of companies pulling that strategy piece back in-house, because that's always felt weird to me that you would outsource that to an agency.
And really, you have to ask yourself, if you're an organization, who owns the relationship? And who do you want to own the relationship? Do you want to have a close relationship with these influencers? Because as someone who came from agency, who owned an agency, agencies do come and go, right? As you were saying with Symantec, they had a lot. And that's kind of, do you want your influencer relationships to go with your agency? You may not want that. So the other challenge for agencies is budget. Because influencer relations started out, say in 2007, 2008, 9, 10, it was really earned media. Because these bloggers were just so thrilled, or YouTubers, to get invited to events and get free product, and that was enough. And then as they started getting bigger and trying to make what they were doing into a job, they started needing money. And all of a sudden, if a budget for an agency doesn't go up, that is part of the fees. Fees go down, margins go down. So agencies pay influencers less. You get, it's a downward spiral from there.
There's also an additional element to this, and you're absolutely right, and that brands need to be thoughtful about the relationship that they want to foster between the brand and the influencer. Unless you sell commodity products, or unless you sell to marketing and PR, the people that need to do the engagement aren't the people in your agency, because they don't have the right set of expertise. Neither are they your PR department or your marketing department. Very often, I was just mentioning Oracle. The job of PR and AR at Oracle is to be the connector between their internal experts and the influencers. But the last person that a NoSQL influencer wants to talk to is the AR person at Oracle that knows very little about that. They want to talk to the guy who's built it or who's responsible for Java there.
Right, right. And so I was going to ask about, can you get it wrong? Are there things you shouldn't do when you're embarking on influencer marketing? It sounds like not having that direct relationship with the influencer is one. What are some other things? Like, can you get it wrong?
Yeah, well, first of all, not disclosing. That's a big thing. And you still see examples of that, or disclosure that is kind of masked. And especially, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, since 2009, you must disclose payment. And that is even if you bring an influencer to an event, you pay for their travel. That must be disclosed. In Canada, for any Canadians who are here, that changed in 2016. Canada mirrored the FTC rules. And the onus is on the agencies and the companies to disclose. So I think that's really important. Disclosure, transparency, because it's trust. Because we don't mind if someone is being paid for something, as long as we know what they're doing. The second thing is around authenticity. You want to make sure that whatever you're asking the influencer to do fits with their brand, because otherwise your audience is going to go, well, this is a commercial. I try to skip commercials, when I watch TV. Why am I watching it now?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, everybody's getting it wrong. And the question is how wrong, and how do you improve from this, right? So again, I'm back to leading with data. So you do something. Can you guys still hear me? Hear me? Yeah. Okay. So you do something and it works at a certain level, but there are many things in your campaign, in your first initiatives that you're going to do wrong. And the question is, how can you improve for the next time around? But any new practice that you start to formalize, you're going to get it more wrong than right the first few times. So, but no one should shy away from this, because let me tell you that when you invest in print ads or TV ads today, you're getting pretty wrong. And you actually have data to show this to you. So the question is really a relative one. The second thing I would say is that the biggest challenge for most companies that get started with influencer marketing is to tiptoe into this without really meaning to. I can't tell you the number of CMOs that I meet that will tell their team, we need to do influencer marketing, but without either giving the means or clear directions to their team on what it is that they really mean and want to do. And then you do it just for show, and it typically doesn't really work. And so I'd say that having a commitment and a strategy is really important. The challenge that most brands have and most marketers have as well, and again, I'll self-reflect because I was one of them. Marketers really like the sound of their own voice.
Generally, yes.
And so you like sharing your content, and you think your company is the best and your product's amazing, etc. And when you come across someone who's not on payroll, who will tell you that your baby's ugly, it's very easy to sidestep them. It's a lot harder with influencers because you have data that shows that they matter to your market. But still, some companies will do this. We worked with an oil and gas company a couple years ago that told us that our technology was not working properly because they talked to all these environment influencers that refused to support their fracking program. And we sort of looked at them sideways and we're like, well, it's possible the technology is not working. There's also a chance that your pitch is not exactly appropriate for the audience you're looking at.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to really be reflective when you get the feedback from influencers where you say, hey, we're doing this event or this product launch. Would you like to talk about it? And say no. So the folks and the marketers that will succeed will be the ones that will ask the next question and say why. And very often what you'll find is that feedback loop is invaluable to companies. We work with a large cell phone manufacturer that delayed the launch by a year of one of their phones, and for good reasons, because the feedback that they got from influencers involved early in the process was not good. And they estimated as a result of this that the launch would have been a failure. And so they took the financial hit for delaying the launch. I mean, no one knows what would have happened, but the guess is it would have been bad.
Right.
And instead, they were able to make some tweaks to the product they were releasing, and got the unfeathered support from these same influencers that were acknowledged in the product roadmap.
Right. So you touched on something, Martin, around kind of disclosure, paid versus unpaid. And certainly we're seeing a change, right? There is a much higher volume of paid and ad posts in my Instagram feed than there ever has been before. And they've shifted where, in the past it might have been fairly obvious this mom of 3 or 4 obviously got these 2 beautiful strollers for free and is it's a paid post, but they were never disclosing it. Do you guys think that there's more? So there's already some regulation that's come down. Do you think there's more coming down the pipe? And how's that going to change the landscape?
So my thoughts on this, I don't know. First of all, regulation is all over the place today. So there's no one set of regulations. If you look at Canada, it's different from US, it's different from Europe, which is different from Asia, and each country within, right? So right now, the problems that the dust has not settled on regulations. Our advice to our customers is always to have your ethical standard for disclosure to be higher than the legal standards, which tend to make everything else easier, because now you can play from a level playing field. The other aspect that we've noticed, and I'll speak from the guy who looks at the technology and the data viewpoint. We don't see through data a strong pattern of being more or less successful for paid posts or organic posts.
Really?
There's not a ton of difference. There is a ton of difference based on the authenticity of the posts, right? So if you're getting paid, but the story could have been written just the same if it was not a paid post, your audience will react positively to it. If they know that you're already a fan of that brand, if they know that this fits your overall personal brand, they won't judge you for making money on it. With some exceptions, right? I mean, there are some professions like journalism where you just get fired for these type of things.
In most countries.
But anyways, so with some exceptions, that we don't see a big difference. Inversely, stories that just feel out of context for the audience will yield much lower results, whether or not they're disclosed as being paid or not, because it just won't feel right to the audience. And the irony is that unless you look at the data, it will look invisible to the marketer, because you still have Jane Doe with 5 million followers on Instagram that just posted your thing and you're happy. But then if you look at the pattern of engagement with her content, you see that post triggered a bunch of people that stopped listening to her. And she started to lose her credibility with the audience. So I think it's more at that level that influencers need to be mindful, much more than the paid versus not paid.
Yeah, and that speaks to creativity and control. Because so often we want to control the message. I mean, you said your legal counsel won't let you put a link, let alone, go to an influencer, say, okay, develop something. But, how do you balance that between what the organization's message is or stories are, and then what the influencer wants to create? There's a consultant in New York, David Berkowitz, who talked about the concept of story making versus storytelling. I think it's a really good one. Story making is when you're essentially collaborating with an influencer on a story. So they're telling your stories in their own way to their audience on your behalf. And it's a very different thing, because so much of marketing and PR is just broadcast. This is our message. This is our message. Hitting people over the head. And unless you can give influencers, whether they're paid or not, just because you're paying them, doesn't mean you can control everything they say. And you shouldn't want to. You need to have that level of trust. How you build that is a whole other thing.
Right. So thinking about how you build that trust, you guys have some examples of some great campaigns, some that were really well built, well researched. I think we'd love to have some really tangible examples where you've seen influencers really at work at its best.
Yeah, I've got one, and I was hoping to play the video, but for some reason it's geo-blocked here. It was done by Edelman in Canada. It was for Canada's 150th anniversary about a year and a bit ago, and it started with an insight. And the insight was that Colonel Sanders lived the end of his life outside of Toronto. He wanted to become a Canadian because he was unhappy with the way things were here. And he thought, no kidding. I mean, I had no idea.
I can't relate.
Yeah. So he lived in Canada, and in fact, he had sold KFC US, but was running the Canadian operation. So Edelman came up with an idea, and they partnered with an influencer who did a funny take on Canada-US relations, on the difference between Canada and the US and why KFC, and they changed the name to KEHAFC across the country, would work. And that they got something like 50 or 60 million views. And that was a paid campaign. It was disclosed as sponsored. But it worked with the comedian because he had full say over what he could, or pretty much full say. They provided him with the insights. And that's, it's just a great example of something working well. And really, you know, in Canada's 150th anniversary, KFC, what's the tie-in? None. But they made one, and it really, you know, I'm still talking about it.
Yeah,
I can't watch the video anymore.
I'll wait until my next trip to Toronto
to watch
it. I'll share a story and to answer your question. A couple weeks ago, I was at an event in London where I met a guy by the name of Alan Jope, who's one of the leaders at Unilever. I think he leads the personal care and beauty practice there. And he shared one tidbit of the strategy of Unilever that I thought was fascinating, which was that currently at Unilever, 50% of their revenue comes from what he defines as purpose-led brands. And these brands grow 50% higher, at a 50% higher rate than the other brands at Unilever that are more commodity brands, which in CPG is not unusual, right? There's just a lot of commodity brands. And the goal of the company is really to focus on this almost exclusively and either transform or drop the other brands in their portfolio for that very reason. So the notion of engaging influencers, building trust and authenticity is directly tied to this, right? How do you engage someone in context of what you're trying to do that happens to match what they're trying to do, right? And just find that common ground, and this is where the authenticity starts. Where you don't try to get them to talk about fracking if they care about environment, right? It just doesn't work. There's no authenticity in this. Even if you pay someone $1 million to talk to their followers and copy paste your exact message, you have zero resonance with that community for that very reason. But the minute you start engaging in a context that is truthful and that is authentic is the minute that you start winning. So the latest example of this, if you look at what Nike did with Kaepernick, they're making a brand statement, right? And I can tell you that from this, there will be many influencer campaigns that will ensue that won't involve Kaepernick, but will involve the underlying idea of Nike standing for something. Right. Another one before that we happened to work on some time ago, another P&G brand with Always. So I don't know if you remember the Like a Girl campaign from a few years back. To this day, is still paying dividends. For that matter, Nike sort of took that campaign on as well, the Like a Girl campaign. And so the original sort of TV ad brand positioning and social work that they had done has been vastly superseded by the influencer effort and the grassroots effort that happened on the tail end of this. But again, it starts with a brand that speaks to an audience and something that the audience cares about and makes a statement. So short of this, engaging in a way that is authentic, if you don't have that thing, and you don't have to be a brand that is a do-gooder to this. It could be fun, or it could be very geeky, or it doesn't really matter. It's your thing. What is your thing?
Right.
And how do you do it?
So it was Billy Crystal.
Was
what
it?
Is this? If you guys remember the movie. City Slickers, anyone? All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing is reciprocity, I think, is really important. Reciprocity is something that's common across all cultures. So if I give you something, chances are you're going to want to give me something in return. But, you know, someone has to start it. And I think from a reciprocity level, organizations really need to give influencers enough at the beginning. And part of that is like saying, okay, you go do this, because that builds trust. And then they start to trust you, or be honest with them about what you want and kind of, you know, open the bathrobe, so to speak, on your company. What are some of the challenges you've had? What are some of the secrets? You know, I know that you can't give away everything proprietary and you don't want to, but you need to do that. We worked for a company that really had bad, and this was a really focused influencer campaign because it was an advisory board, and advisory boards can be great influencer campaigns too. They had a challenge. They were thought of as not being environmental. And yet environmentally was one of their core pillars, but they weren't, you know, able to communicate that to stakeholders and really to the world at large. So we brought a group of people who were very critical to form an advisory board, and the company brought in their researchers, shared proprietary data. Now they were under NDA, but they started to see that the company was serious, and that by doing that, it was a risk, but it over time changed their opinion. So if it was a fracking company, like Pierre was saying, and that might not work necessarily because you have to pick and choose people who are kind of in the middle of it. But you know, you need to do that. Know that it takes time. You can't just go to an influencer and say, okay, here's $50 or $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever. Do it. You've got to build that relationship first, just like in PR.
Just on this, the metaphor I usually use for the right way to engage with influencer is the dating one.
Yeah.
Right? You need to date your influencers, and if at some point you want to get into a greater commitment where you actually pay the influencer because you ask them to travel to New York or someplace, etc., that's fine. There's no issue. You ask them to do work. It's normal that you pay them for the efforts. But if your first reflex is to write a check, it's not dating anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely not dating. I wonder where
Everyone
you're gonna
should
go with
tweet
that.
that. If your first influence is to write a check, it's not dating anymore.
So it's clear from all the examples, right? What it all hinges on is that authenticity, right? So what you're after in an influencer campaign is that amplification. You get that amplification obviously by using the right influencer, finding the person that is going to be authentic, aligned with your brand. Where do you start? How do you find that individual? Is it always somebody external, or should you be looking even within your own organization?
So our data shows that it's both. Mm-hmm. It depends on context. And it depends also on what you want to do, where you have brand advocacy, expertise, and ability to connect with your audience, or sort of the three parameters that you need, the three prisms you need to look through. Our experience is that it's a lot easier to build brand advocacy over time and through passion than it is to build expertise or teach someone how to be an influencer.
Right.
I've been on social for a long time, and my audience stays small, and it's sort of
mine too.
That's what I do. So, and there's nothing you'll do to teach me to be the next million follower type of person. It's just that's not what I do. So I'd say for as long as you identify someone, internal or external, that has created a captive audience that is of interest to you, that has some level of critical mass of engagement, and that has the type of expertise in the space that you're seeking. In some cases, it could be very light because you're talking about a CPG product. In other cases, if it's a technical thing or healthcare or medical, it might be very heavy. So I'd say I'd start with this. And if on top of this, the brand advocacy is already there, then that's great. If it's not, you can develop it, because they're showing you the signs that if they don't know you or they don't like you yet, they really should.
Right.
And so it becomes more of the day-to-day of a PR person in many ways, right? That's what you do, is you're trying to convince people that you're worthy of attention.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's more the parameters. Sometimes you'll find these people internally. We work with Adobe, and they were very surprised to see that this junior person in marketing that nobody knew was their top influencer, and she worked at Adobe, and they had no idea. And so sometimes you find these gems internally. In other cases, you can recruit them in. In other cases, you can work with them outside. I don't really have a strong point of view on this.
And I just want to add one cautionary note about working with internal influencers, and that is they do leave your organization. And so if they're too tied to your brand, that becomes a challenge. And sometimes they leave not of their own volition, because the organization is reshifted, and suddenly your influencer is gone out there, and they're so tied to you, and it's a challenge for them too. So I'm not saying don't do it. I definitely do it with people, but do it knowing that you may have to have an exit plan, and think about that at the beginning. What are you going to do if they leave? How are they going to leave with their dignity? And how are you going to still, retain some of your audience and the influence you have over your audience that they had? So I think that's part of contingency planning. And a lot of times when we work with internal influencers, we don't think of that, especially if you're with a company. Oh, I'm going to be there forever. But the reality is, and I say this to the social media students I teach, you're going to get a job. The reality is you're going to leave that job these days. And so how do you deal with that? Keeping all the doors open and keeping the relationships for the organization and the influencer.
So the relationship is obviously very key, whether it's an internal or an external person. First time I ever showed a client our influencers platform, I will never forget. The first question out of the client's mouth was, can I create a list of these influencers to send my press release to? No, that's not what it does. Obviously, spamming an influencer or a potential influencer with a press release, not ideal. Let's talk about that dating scenario. How do you establish that relationship? And then more importantly, on an ongoing basis, how do you maintain and manage that relationship with the influencer? Make sure they don't leave. Make sure they don't get wooed off by another brand.
I mean, let me ask back because all of you have some experience in either PR or sales in some fashion, whether formally or informally. We all sell to each other.
Yes.
The best way to sell to someone is to talk inside their story, not yours.
Absolutely.
Right? The best way to sell to an influencer is to talk inside their story, not yours. So again, in many ways, marketers are the worst equipped people to do this, because we used to spam people with our messages and not ever hear anything back outside of fishbowl, which is like when you bring a few customers together to do a panel. And so this is skills that need to be unlearned and relearned if you're coming from marketing. Folks in PR know this, because that's good PR is what you do for journalists. You say, hey, just read this article you wrote. It's really awesome. Did you know that, da, da, da. And then that's how you get in. Yeah. But there's no press release that you send to journalists that they'll just pick up because they care about you.
Yeah.
Same goes.
Yeah, and actually, I think those words you said, let me put you on our list. Just that. Get away from that mindset of, these lists that you manage. I worked in an agency, I'm not going to name them, a long time ago, and they had this huge database of media. And I thought one day, well, I'm going to try to go through this list. There were at least 10 dead people on that list that were still getting the news releases by broadcast fax. No kidding. And so, that notion, especially with influencer marketing, where it really is, the personal touch is so important, because they're not corporations. They're individuals. So you have an organization, and you're dealing with an individual who is... you're not on equal footing. They're not a company. I mean, they may be incorporated, but they're not the same as you. So you have to remember to keep treating them as individuals. And spamming, oh my God.
No more spam. No spam.
And if I may, just one last point on this. The importance of the personal connection with that person rather than their entity, even if they belong to an organization, is really critical these days, because most journalists, most analysts don't have jobs forever anymore. A lot of them actually freelance for their publications. And so for you to build that trust with that person wherever they go is really the way to go. I mean, I mentioned the work we do with Altimeter today, and Brian Solis is the one that is spearheading it. I met him 10 years ago. He was five jobs ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
So it's important to preserve that personal connection because it will help you over time.
It's a relationship
Yeah.
play, right? That person may
Yeah.
move around, but you need to have that relationship
Yeah.
with them. So I'm curious, do we have any questions from the audience for our last few minutes? Keith's bringing the mic over, 1 sec.
All right, so I was actually just reading about an influencer strategy gone bad in Chicago, where there was a restaurant that I actually really liked, and they invited a lot of influencers for a dinner, which featured interesting preservation techniques of their food, which they found out at the end of the dinner. It was a plastic wrap company, and the food had been prepared 3 days ago, and people got incredibly upset, and it really, I mean, it was very bad for the restaurant. So how do you recover from something like that? And then also, how do you vet out those bad ideas? I mean, I don't think they realize it was a terrible idea.
Well, first of all, don't lie.
Right.
You know, that's the
Fair.
first.
It's fair.
That's the first thing. I mean, it comes down to ethics, like that company's ethics. Second of all, you want to be transparent. Again, this was more, well, kind of an influencer thing. This was that same agency that I worked at that had the list with dead people. One of the people there had, we'd hired a cleaning expert who'd written a book on cleaning to speak on behalf of a well-known cleaning product that many of you probably know and use. And this cleaning expert, you know, he had his book. The media advisory was sent out, this is early 2000s, on blank letterhead, not with the agency's name, about this expert who was there to promote his book. But meanwhile, he was there to, you know, shill for the product, in essence, or provide tips for the product. We showed up. I had the great good fortune of being his escort to take him to the interviews. We go to one TV interview. He starts pulling out these bags. The producer started screaming at me, saying, wait a minute, this was a book interview. What are all these products for? I had to explain it. But, you know, the agency was banned from that show for about a year because of that. So always, this goes back to disclosure. Disclose. You can be creative, and you should be creative, but that's just a lie.
All right, thank
Not a
you.
good-
Other questions? No other questions. Come on, guys. There must be one. I was thinking about an example, though, of a campaign gone awry. Last year, a beverage company put out a commercial on social, all around kind of social advocacy, starring one of the Kardashian sisters.
Yes.
And it was a horrible flame out for them. You know, how important is it to pick the right influencer? It's not that the individual starring in that commercial didn't have scads and scads of followers, but she's not exactly known as somebody who resonates with social advocacy, right? She can sell lipsticks like there's nobody's business, but she wasn't the right influencer. How important is it to pick the right influencers? Did that restaurant have the wrong influencers on the panel?
Well, so it sounds like what happened at this restaurant is a little different than just getting the wrong influencers.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah.
had, just
Also
got it-
lying,
They got
yes.
it wrong altogether.
Yeah.
But vetting out those bad ideas. This commercial was a bad
and in
idea.
general, just to piggyback off what Martin was saying earlier, the notion that you can pre-package a campaign, forget about the food itself, but a campaign without involving the influencers at all in the making is a recipe for failure to begin with, right? Because they have an expertise that you should seek out, and they have a beat for the audience that you want to talk to that is better than yours. And so I think getting them involved in the process would probably have weeded out that idea. And so to answer your question, it's pretty much the same, right? You find people not based on the number of followers. For that matter, we've been advocating with our customers for a long time now to stop paying attention to the follower thing. I had a funny conversation. The same guy at Unilever I mentioned before, and I don't know if you guys followed this on social. A few months back, while at the Cannes Lions Festival, Keith Weed, the CMO of Unilever, had a fit and said, all these fake followers when it comes to influencers, like influencers need to get their act together. And I told Alan the other day, I said, you know why they're doing this? It's because of you. Like you're paying them based on the number of followers they have. So that's the incentive system you've built. The minute you start removing that incentive system and stop paying attention to popularity and start paying attention to impact and relevancy is the minute that you start winning. So when you look at the influencers you want to select for a specific campaign, you look for people that will touch your audience, have demonstrated the ability to impact that audience. And once you find who they are, then you engage them in a way that is meaningful, right? And very often, Justin Bieber and the Kardashians won't make it to that list.
Right.
Sadly.
They've got the reach, but they don't resonate with a lot of topics and a lot of the audience that they've got. I might create more activity.
I mean, Justin Bieber, if you do a search on Traackr, he's doing great on anger management and drugs.
So if you work in those areas, you know who your next influencer is.
Change, yes, definitely. So for your final thought, unless there are any other questions, going once, I'd love to hear one last best practice from each of you, something you'd love our audience to take away with them today.
Well, I think the Kylie Jenner example was a good one. I think when you are working with influencers in the same way that you want to think of your program, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, think about the kind of issue that might happen if things go wrong, and just be prepared for that. Know that you may have to apologize. You may have to apologize really quickly and honestly. The influencer may have to apologize. There's just so many things. The influencer's fans may hate a particular piece of content that the influencer creates, and then the backlash is on your organization. So how do you deal with it? You need to at least have an idea before it happens, because otherwise you're in crisis mode when you should be in issues management mode.
And what I would say, and to sort of reflect on the title for this session as well, I think one thing that is important when you engage in this relationship building with influencers is not to think of an influencer as a media channel, not to think of someone that will amplify your story, but rather, to use Martin's words, someone that you can work with and partner to make your story, right? If you don't go through that process of recreating, reinventing that story, letting them own the words, not yours, theirs, on how it needs to be told to their audience, is the first step to being successful. Going all the way in and expecting someone to copy-paste something from a brief and have that work is a recipe for failure.
For sure, absolutely. Pierre, Martin, thank you so much.